I went to work when I was just out of grammar school. I got a job as quotation board boy in a stock brokerage office. I was quick at figures. At school I did 3 years of arithmetic in one. I was particularly good at mental arithmetic. As quotation board boy, I posted the numbers on the big board in the customer's room. One of the customers usually sat by the ticker and called out the prices. They couldn't come too fast for me. I have always remembered figures. No trouble at all. There were plenty of other employees in that office. Of course I made friends with the other fellows, but the work I did, if the market was active, kept me too busy from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. to let me do much talking. I don't care for it anyhow during business hours, but a busy market did not keep me from thinking about the work. Those quotations did not represent prices of stocks to me, so many dollars per share. They were numbers. Of course, they meant something. They were always changing. It was all I had to be interested in, changes. Why did they change? I didn't know. I didn't care. I didn't think about that. I simply saw that they changed. That was all I had to think about 5 hours every day and 2 on Saturdays. That they were always changing. That is how I first came to be interested in the behavior of prices. I had a very good memory for figures. I could remember in detail how the prices had acted on the previous day, just before they went up or down. My fondness for mental arithmetic came in very handy. It was not long before I was anticipating movements in prices. My only guide, as I say, was their past performances. I carried the dope sheets in my mind. I looked for stock prices to run on form. I had clocked them. You know what I mean. You can spot, for instance, where the buying is only a trifle better than the selling. A battle goes on in the stock market, and the tape is your telescope. You can depend upon it 7 out of 10 cases. Another lesson I learned early is that there is nothing new in Wall Street. There can't be, because speculation is as old as the hills. Whatever happens in the stock market today has happened before and will happen again. I've never forgotten that. I suppose I really managed to remember when and how it happened. The fact that I remember that way is my way of capitalizing experience. It was rather a sort of record of my hits and misses, and next to the determination of probable movements, I was most interested in verifying whether I had observed accurately, in other words, whether I was right. Later I would check up with actual transcriptions from the tape. That is how I first came to take an interest in the message of the tape. The fluctuations were from the first associated in my mind with upward or downward movements. But what the dickens does that matter? Your business with the tape is now, not tomorrow. That was the reason. They knew what they were going to do. And even if they didn't sell the stock themselves, they at least didn't buy it. There was no inside buying. No reason why it should not break. Well, I kept up my little memorandum book perhaps 6 months, instead of leaving for home the moment I was through with my work. I'd jot down the figures I wanted and would study the changes, always looking for the repetitions and parallelisms of behavior, learning to read the tape, although I was not aware of it at the time. One day one of the office boys was older than it came to me where I was eating my lunch and asked me on the quiet if I had any money. "Why do you want to know?" I said. "Well," he said, "I've got a dandy tip on Burlington. I'm going to play it if I can get somebody to go in with me." "That's what I mean, play it," he said. "How much you got? How much you need?" "Well, I can trade in 5 shares by putting up $5. How are you going to play it?" "I'm going to buy all the Burlington the bucket shop will let me carry with the money I give him for margin." He said, "It's going up sure. It's like picking up money. We'll double ours in a jiffy." "Hold on," I said to him, and pulled out my little dope book. But all I could see was that this was a grand chance to test the accuracy of my work, of my hobby. It struck me at once that if my dope didn't work in practice, there was nothing in the theory of it too. interest anybody. So I gave him all I had, and with our pooled resources he went to one of the nearby bucket shops and bought some Burlington. 2 days later we cashed in. I made a profit of $3.12. After that first trade, I got to speculating on my own hook in the bucket shops. I'd go during my lunch hour, and buy or sell it never made any difference to me. I was playing a system and not a favorite stock or backing opinions. All I knew was the arithmetic of it. My folks objected, but they couldn't say much when they saw what I was making. I was only a kid and office boy wages were not very high. I did mighty well on my own hook. She said it was more money than she ever heard any boy of 15 had made, starting with nothing. She didn't quite believe it was real money. She used to worry and fret about it. But I didn't think of anything except that I could keep on proving my figuring was right. I am much braver than when I risk $1 million. If I have another $1 million, solve it away. Also, no Welsher could ever get back in the game, wouldn't have any trade. I didn't have a following. I kept my business to myself. It was a one-man business. Anyhow, it was my head, wasn't it? Prices either were going the way I doped them out, without any help from friends or partners, or they were going the other way. And nobody could stop them out of kindness to me. I couldn't see where I needed to tell my business to anybody else. I've got friends, of course, but my business has always been the same man affair. That is why I have always played a lone hand. I had to be changing brokers all the time, going from one bucket shop to another. It got so that I had to give a fictitious name. I'd begin light, only 15 or 20 shares at times. When they got suspicious, I'd lose on purpose at first, and then sting them proper. Of course, after a while they'd find me too expensive, and they'd tell me to take myself and my business elsewhere and not interfere with the owner's dividends. Once, when the big concern I'd been trading with for months shut down on me, I made up my mind to take a little more of their money away from them. The manager told me what they asked him, and I told him my name was Edward Robinson, of Cambridge. He telephoned the glad news to the big chief. But the other end wanted to know what I looked like. When the manager told me that, I said to him, "Tell him I am a short 7 fat man with dark hair and a bushy beard." But he described me instead. And then he listened, and his face got red, and he hung up and told me to beat it. "What did they say to you?" I asked him politely. I tried to get them to let me trade at long intervals by dividing my visits among them all, but that didn't work. Finally, there was only one left to me, and that was the biggest and richest of all, Cosmopolitan Stock Brokerage Company. Oh, not because it wasn't sportsmanship, but because they knew it would give them a black eye to publish the news that they wouldn't take a fellow's business just because that fellow happened to make a little money. If you put up a point margin, it meant that if it broke 89, you were wiped out automatically. In a bucket shop, the customer is not importuned for more margin or put to the painful necessity of telling his broker to sell for anything he can get. Still, that was the only bucket shop that would take my business at all, and I had to accept their terms or quit trading. Of course, I had my ups and downs, but was a winner on balance. However, the Cosmopolitan people were not satisfied with the awful handicap they had tacked on me, which should have been enough to beat anybody. They tried to double-cross me. They didn't get me. I escaped because of one of my hunches. The Cosmopolitan, as I said, was my last resort. It was the richest bucket shop in New England, and as a rule they put no limit on a trade. Metals everything that was bought and sold in New York, Chicago, Boston, and Liverpool. You know how they traded in bucket shops. You gave your money to a clerk and told him what you wished to buy or sell. You thus had only of a points run for your money. I sometimes had a line of 5,000 shares. Well, on the day the thing happened that I am going to tell you, I was short 3,500 shares of sugar. I had 7 big pink tickets for 500 shares each. So they could charge you the buying commission and only give you a run of a point on each point's decline, for they figured the selling commission also exactly as if it were a new trade. Well, this day I remember I had up over $10,000 in margins. Then all of a sudden I didn't like the way sugar was doing its hesitating. I began to feel uncomfortable. I thought I ought to get out of the market. Then it sold at 103. That was low for the day, but instead of feeling more confident, I felt more uncertain. I knew something was wrong somewhere, but I couldn't spot it exactly. But if something was coming and I didn't know where from, I couldn't be on my guard against it. That being the case, I'd better be out of the market. You know, I don't do things blindly. I don't like to. I never did. Even as a kid, I had to know why I should do certain things. He said he would, and I got up and gave him my place by the ticker so he could call out the prices for the boy. I took my 7 sugar tickets out of my pocket and walked over to the counter, to where the clerk was who marked the tickets when you closed your trades. But I didn't really know why I should get out of the market, so I just stood there, leaning against the counter, my tickets in my hand so that the clerk couldn't see them. Pretty soon I heard the clicking of a telegraph instrument, and I saw Tom Burnham, the clerk, turn his head quickly and listen. Then I felt that something crooked was hatching, and I decided not to wait any longer. Just then Dave Wyman by the ticker began, and quick as a flash I slapped my tickets on the counter in front of the clerk and yelled, "Close sugar," before Dave had finished calling the price. So, of course, the house had to close my sugar at the last quotation. What Dave called turned out to be 103 again. According to my dope, sugar should have broken 103 by now. The engine wasn't hitting right. I had the feeling that there was a trap in the neighborhood. At all events, the telegraph instrument was now going like mad, and I noticed that Tom Burnham, the clerk, had left my tickets unmarked where I laid them, and was listening to the clicking as if he were waiting for something. So I yelled at him, "Hey Tom, what in hell are you waiting for? Mark the price on these tickets 103. Get a gatin'." Everybody in the room heard me and began to look toward us and ask what was the trouble, for, you see, while the Cosmopolitan had never laid down, there was no telling, and a run on a bucket shop can start like a run on a bank. If one customer gets suspicious, the others follow suit. So Tom looked sulky, but came over and marked my tickets closed at 103 and shoved the 7 of them over toward me. He sure had a sour face. 12 say, the distance from Tom's place to the cashier's cage wasn't over 8 feet. But I had got to the cashier to get my money when Dave Wyman by the ticker yelled excitedly, "Gosh, sugar, 108, but it was too late." So I just laughed and called over to Tom, "It didn't work that time, did it, old boy?" Of course, it was a put-up job. Henry Williams and I together were short 6,000 shares of sugar. That bucket shop had my margin and Henry's, and there may have been a lot of other sugar shorts in the office. Possibly 8 or 10,000 shares in all. Suppose they had $20,000 in sugar margins. That was enough to pay the shop to thimble-rig the market on the New York Stock Exchange and wipe us out. In the old days, whenever a bucket shop found itself loaded with too many bulls on a certain stock, it was a common practice to get some broker to wash down the price of that particular stock far enough to wipe out all the customers that were long of it. This seldom cost the bucket shop more than a couple of points on a few hundred shares, and they made thousands of dollars. That was what the Cosmopolitan did to get me and Henry Williams and the other sugar shorts. Their brokers in New York ran up the price to 108. Of course it fell right back, but Henry and a lot of others were wiped out. Whenever there was an unexplained sharp drop which was followed by instant recovery, the newspapers in those days used to call it a bucket shop drive. To double-cross me, a New York operator did them out of over $70,000. This man, who was quite a market factor in his day and a member of the New York Stock Exchange, made a great name for himself as a bear during the Bryan Panic of '96. He was forever running up against stock exchange rules that kept him from carrying out some of his plans at the expense of his fellow members. One day he figured that there 13 would be no complaints from either the exchange or the police authorities if he took from the bucket shops of the land some of their ill-gotten gains. In the instance I speak of, he sent 35 men to act as customers. They went to the main office and to the bigger branches. On a certain day at a fixed hour, the agents all bought as much of a certain stock as the managers would let them. They had instructions to sneak out at a certain profit. Of course, what he did was to distribute bull tips on that stock among his cronies, and then he went into the floor of the stock exchange and bid up the price, helped by the room traders, who thought he was a good sport. Being careful to pick up the right stock for that work, there was no trouble in putting up the price 3 or 4 points. His agents at the bucket shops cashed in as prearranged. A fellow told me the originator cleaned up $70,000 net, and his agents made their expenses and their pay besides. He played that game several times all over the country, punishing the bigger bucket shops of New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. One of his favorite stocks was Western Union because it was so easy to move a semi-active stock like that a few points up or down. His agents bought it at a certain figure, sold at 2 points profit, went short, and took 3 points more. By the way, I read the other day that that man died poor and obscure. If he had died in 1896, he would have got at least a column on the first page of every New York paper. As it was, he got to lines on the 5th